think I've ever told you this. You literally changed my life doing that movie.
You changed mine too.
It's been a long time, baby.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I like to talk about entertainment media. For the last few months, oh god, I can't believe I've been in this bubble for months. I've been covering Bridgerton Season 3, and yes, I do have more videos about the show on my to-do list for this channel. I'm currently in the middle of working on a Francesca Bridgerton video. Please hold off on sharing book spoilers because I have not finished working on that video just yet. How do we feel about this shirt, by the way? Does it look like I'm trouble and I'm up to no good? Because that's more or less what my relative said about the shirt when I got it back in the motherland. That wasn't actually what they said, but what they said doesn't really translate well into English. I am also wearing new trousers again, also from the motherland. Please let me be excited about having trousers that actually fit me correctly because truly, I cannot find ones that do unless I'm back in my motherland.
It's fashion meets...
One of the talking points that came up in passing in relation to different characters and storylines and even some of the things outside of the material itself was the show's approach to diversity, so let me try to consolidate one or two of the issues I've observed in the larger discourse. The Bridgerton books were as white as an English boarding school, but in the adaptation process to bring the material to a live-action television series, they decided to make it ethnically diverse, and this was a massive selling point of the show to a whole new audience like myself who had no idea these books existed until the show was created. All the romance girlies who grew up loving watching Jane Austen adaptations on film and television now get to watch this fairy tale version of Regency romance where you can be any ethnicity and participate in the sexist classist marriage mart.
It's not just a bag. It's Prada.
However, the cracks already began to show even in season 1 when they made the absolutely baffling, terrible decision to try to explain why there is ethnic diversity in the canon. The reason they gave was that an interracial relationship in the epicenter of English racism, English colonialism, English monarchy, an interracial relationship in the English monarchy will somehow magically cure society of systemic racism.
Oh no, did this feel creepy? I said, don't make it creepy, guys.
There are other video essays already on the internet about season 1 that have pointed out that this half-baked approach to trying to be inclusive fell short for characters like Simon, his father, the Mondriches, and Lady Danbury, and I would point you towards those videos if you are not already familiar with that particular point of discourse. And keep in mind, this was only in season 1. There were a lot more things that would accumulate over the course of seasons 2 and 3 to add to this larger discourse. I would also add to this section the many statements given by Ruby Barker, the actress who played Marina, about the ways she claims that the show had failed to support her or provide her with resources to deal with the massive amount of hate and backlash she received as a young black woman thrust into the spotlight, playing a character that a lot of viewers had unkind things to say about. And another tidbit I would add, and I don't entirely know if this is true or not because I don't exactly know where this story came from, but I have seen it brought up more than once online. Some fans have posted on the internet claims that Jonathan Bailey and Simone Ashley took it upon themselves to pay out of their own pockets for a wrap party for season 2 because Netflix and or Shondaland was only going to provide people with some sandwiches. If anyone has an actual source for that story, please share the title of the interview and the outlet, but don't post links because YouTube filters those out as spam. On top of that, Jonathan and Simone had to do a lot of their press when they were the leads of the show in a trio unit with Charitra, the fabulous actress who played Edwina, instead of getting to be the main romantic leads of the show who get to do the fabulous couple stuff where you're paired up in interviews, paired up in photo shoots, where you would presumably get to play up how good the chemistry is between the two of you. Conversely, Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton, the one and only entirely white main couple in Netflix's Bridgerton universe thus far, were paired up in a significant number of interviews, photo shoots, press stops, and just overall their media circus felt like it was at an entirely different scale. It was this massive global press tour, the likes of which I feel like I haven't seen very often, particularly for Netflix releases in recent years. Now, I want to circle back to the character of Lady Danbury. In seasons 1 and 2, she acted as a sort of mentor figure for Simon and then Kate, who were the non-Bridgerton main characters in the main couple of each season. Were we to have followed that pattern into season 3, she would have been a mentor to Penelope, which was actually a relationship that existed in book 4, the source material for season 3. But then the show opted to scrap that storyline because of the baffling notion that they needed to have Lady Danbury not just be a mentor every season, except she goes ahead and still does the exact same thing she always does, but this time for Francesca Bridgerton. So what was the reason for scrapping the Penelope storyline in that case?
It makes no damn sense.
Now, I want to put a spotlight on the train of thought that some people in the audience have, that the optics of all of this are not great when you have one of your only black lead characters, who more specifically is a black woman at the age of already having been married, already having had children, and those children are now grown up and out of her house, and have that character's material on the show largely consist of always helping other people. And to that point, I would like to direct your attention towards a comment from one of my viewers on a video I did about Penelope and Lady Danbury's friendship in the books, and the lack of that friendship being present during season 3. I understand the importance of Penelope and Lady Danbury's relationship in the books. It was nice, but I must say, since Lady Danbury is a black woman in the show, I don't necessarily like the concept of her main purpose constantly being the stereotypical and borderline racist trope of being the magical black person who was always helping others find happiness and never getting a chance at real happiness of her own. And that is saying it in the nicest way. Queen Charlotte really started this disdain for the fact that they only really give Lady Danbury a story if she is suffering or being the help of others, and I'm over it. I need more for her. Now, I think this would be much more easily achieved if the show had more than 8 episodes per season. They keep trying to do these large ensemble stories as if it's just another Shondaland show, with seemingly zero consideration for the fact that Shondaland's other hit series that were proven to be successful, such as Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, those were all on primetime television, on basic cable, where these series would more often than not get at least 15 to 16 episodes per season, not 8. However, it's still very valid that a diverse audience you courted in the first place, with the promise of being ethnically and culturally inclusive within a Regency romance story, will expect you to take the necessary time and consideration for which stereotypes or tropes you might want to avoid for certain characters. And I've had a fair bit of time to ponder these issues, not just as they relate to Lady Danbury, but any and every issue I've seen raised as to how the show has been clumsy more than once with this premise of doing an ethnically diverse Regency romantic fairy tale setting without provoking a whole bunch of problems that were in fact avoidable. As a result of this pondering, the example I kept circling back to was the oh so iconic, the one and only, the undisputed, the only version of this story that I in fact care about, Whitney Houston's Cinderella.
Thanks.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening!
And given the fact that our parents, Brandy and Paolo Montalban, are about to reunite as husband and wife in Descendants 4, which, let's be clear here, I have never seen a single Descendants film.
I don't know what any of that means.
Since our parents are coming home, now seemed like the perfect time to have this conversation, because there is a trio of films that have been occupying a significant amount of space in my brain. I've been wanting to do a video essay, but I kept putting it off because whenever I have a niche video essay topic that I want to do and I want to make it a priority, it flops. I'm looking at you, Some Like It Hot White Chicks video essay. And honestly, my Baz Luhrmann's Elvis video essay too, why did that flop? That movie was all over the media during award show season and it was a certified bop. And yet I make an in-depth video about it and it flopped.
Sharon Tate was the last done.
If I need to use Bridgerton to Trojan horse a small Blasian Solidarity video I've been wanting to make for years now, I will do it, especially after all the unpleasant, unsolicited melodrama of season 3 flooding my brain with cortisol. Now I'm going to take a moment to indulge in something just for me. But LadyJenevia, Rebecca!
You say in your whiny little bitch voice.
Didn't you just do a self-indulgent video by talking about The Crow 2024? Yes, I did. And like I said before, the more bad guys Bill's Eric takes out, the more dramatic his eyeliner is going to become. But I'm doing another self-indulgent one before we get back into the more unfiltered Bridgerton discourse, specifically about Francesca Bridgerton and Michael Michaela Sterling. I will also circle back to Bridgerton, the show, at the end of this video, once I've shown some love to the Blasian Solidarity trio that occupies space in my heart. So make sure you stick around until the end if it's mainly just Bridgerton that is your hyperfixation. Also, donation links for Palestine, as always, are in the description box. Now let us revisit the most iconic era of Blasian Solidarity in Hollywood. To truly understand why this era of pop culture is one that I love as much as I do, I need to first give a brief history lesson. According to PBS, in the 1980s, LA was facing rising unemployment, widespread drug use, violent crime, aggressive policing, racial tensions, and economic inequality. LA was set to host the 1984 Olympics, and the devil himself, Ronald Reagan, former SAG president and former FBI rat during Hollywood's first big Red Scare, we're talking HUAC era nastiness, Ronald Reaganomics himself increased the LAPD with things like their budget, power, and resources. Laws were brought in prior to the Olympics that allowed the LAPD more powers, such as the expansion of gang sweeps for the duration of the games. Mass arrests became more common, and complaints about police brutality increased 33% between 1984 and 1989. Numerous historical, political analysts have drawn a direct line between Reagan turbocharging the already corrupt LAPD for the 1984 Olympic Games and the LA riots that happened in 1992. For anyone who doesn't already know about this point in history, the LA riots are also known as the Rodney King riots. Rodney King was a black man who experienced vicious police brutality, which was not anything new to the black and brown residents of the greater Los Angeles area. But what made his case particularly notable is that everything that happened to him was caught on videotape. For anyone who's wondering what any of this has to do with the trio of movies I happen to love from the Y2K era, I will get there. But first, I would also like to direct you towards the No Olympics LA website, as they are an organization that opposes the LA Olympics that are currently set to happen in 2028 because of the negative impact the Olympic Games have on the places they are hosted in all over the world, with things like increased militarization, displacing locals, exacerbating housing crises, and so on and so forth. Part of the LA riots included rioting in Koreatown. Though there was some tension between some Black and Asian residents, I want to be mindful of not overgeneralizing the sentiments of these two groups, given the fact that there is also a long history of solidarity between Black and Asian activists long before these riots ever took place. Hannah Kang reported for NBC News that the larger mainstream media was responsible for painting a portrait of high racial tension between two violent groups, Black and Asian, when in actuality, the decades of neglect of the inner city was the real issue. Footage of gun-toting Koreans on rooftops transposed with images of Black youth firebombing businesses with Molotov cocktails painted a picture of a conflict, with Black residents considered lawless and Korean merchants mercenary. Civil rights activist and lawyer Connie Rice said, "The media didn't cover the failure to address the policing. It didn't cover the failure to provide the economic infrastructure. And what we ended up with was kindling, building, and building." The entire topic of the LA riots, the lead up to it, the solidarity, as well as the tensions between various Black and Asian communities in Los Angeles or occupied Turtle Island at large, is far too vast a topic for me to be able to fully cover here, especially when that's not ultimately what the topic of this video is about. But I bring all of this up merely to establish the historical and cultural backdrop and somewhat of a starting point for what I would like to say. Because you have to understand what came directly before this trio of films that I happen to enjoy a great deal, and the fact that these films were able to get made and be cast in the ways that they were is all the more remarkable when there was this larger cultural bias and stereotype exacerbated by the media about hostility and tension between Black and Asian communities. So we have these LA riots in 1992, and then we fast forward a couple of years to 1997, when approximately 60 million viewers tuned in to watch the broadcast of a fabulous, beloved television musical, Whitney Houston's Cinderella. Rodgers and Hammerstein originally wrote their musical version of Cinderella for a television broadcast starring Julie Andrews that aired all the way back in 1957. The next version was first broadcast in 1965, starring Leslie Ann Warren, aka Miss Scarlet.
Practice makes perfect. Huh. I think most men need a little practice, don't you, Mrs. Peacock? Huh?
Producing partners Craig Zadan and Neil Marin first began making efforts to do a new telecast in the early 1990s. In the following years, efforts were made to bring the project to production with Whitney Houston attached, but her busy schedule as a global icon meant that things kept getting delayed. Whitney Houston was not only involved in Cinderella as a performer, but as an executive producer. Earlier on in development, the idea of including Whitney was such that she was meant to play Cinderella, but But by the time real progress started to be made with developing this new Cinderella production, Whitney ultimately chose to not play Cinderella and instead play the fairy godmother. According to her own words in interviews that she gave, she felt that she was past the point of being the right fit to play Cinderella.
I knew there was someone who was a lot more full of energy for that kind of stuff than I was. I mean, I'm a little jaded on the energy level, like.
You're running low.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, you have kids and stuff, you know, and you know, you get kind of like, you know, slow down a little bit.
Whitney ended up hand-selecting Brandy, a teenager already known to many for both her music career and her starring role on the television sitcom Moesha, to play the lead role of Cinderella.
Brandy was definitely handpicked by me. Really? I definitely wanted her to be Cinderella, yes.
Now, if any of you watch basically any interview Brandy has done in recent years about Cinderella, or even the reunion panel she and the rest of the cast did for Entertainment Weekly a couple of years ago, Brandy and more or less every person on that panel, they've talked about how often they are approached by fans about this production of Cinderella.
It was an honor to be part of something so wonderful back then, and even now, and it was multicultural, and it was just so wonderful that children that were watching it could just enjoy it, and all the different kinds of people that were in it, and not even question it, just enjoy it. And it's
yes.
Wonderful, just wonderful.
There are very few weeks that go by, even now, after how many years, 25, that somebody does not come up to me and say how much it meant and how much it changed their lives and how much it started their lives.
Wow.
Yeah. The point where Cinderella changed people's lives and started a new life, a new way of seeing things.
You changed my life, and you changed the life of so many people that I run into to this day. To this day, they say that, you know, Brandy as Cinderella changed the way that they looked at themselves growing up, that anything's possible for them too. So sorry, I'm getting a little emotional.
No, that's
so important.
You know, I have to say that I get stopped a lot about Cinderella, but I remember distinctly walking onto the set and never actually feeling that there was anything different about it. I remember, that Whoopi and I were married, and that, you know, that Paolo was our son. It all just felt like, oh, aren't we
natural?
Aren't we just adorable, you know? And it was funny. I mean, I think everybody just felt completely comfortable.
Yeah, we weren't diverse. We were adorable.
Yeah. We were a family. Yes.
To viewers, and especially to the young people who grew up watching this, it was a seismic shift in their worldview and their ideas about themselves and what was truly possible to achieve, not only because Brandy was the first Black Cinderella on screen, but because of how much diversity there was across the entire lead cast. Cinderella's Prince Charming, or in this case, Prince Christopher, is played by Filipino actor Paolo Montalban, and his parents are played by Whoopi Goldberg and Victor Garber.
I just want to say for the record that to all the people who are wondering how an African-American mother and a Caucasian father can have an Asian son, the genetic math is love plus love equals love.
That's right.
That's what it felt like having Whoopi and Victor as my parents.
This level of ethnic diversity was unprecedented then, and the standard it set often remains unmatched to this very day, decades after it first aired. Whitney Houston and fellow executive producer Deborah Martin Chase had to fight really hard to ensure that not only would Cinderella be Black, but that the world would be as diverse as it ended up being.
It changed how people saw themselves and saw the power of entertainment and how they wanted to view the world.
Power producer Deborah Martin Chase took a gamble, shaking up a Hollywood classic with a multicultural cast.
I knew that changing the images and breaking stereotypes on the screen would result in changing attitudes in real life.
A lot of this, I think, came from the heart and soul of Whitney. You know?
Wow.
I know that a lot of what you're seeing is what she wanted.
Envisioned, yes.
Here we go. There was diversity not just in the principal cast, there was diversity in the supporting cast, in the background.
One reason it was such a smashing success is Whitney Houston, the superstar singer, not only in the movie, but also a producer.
She wanted little black girls to see themselves as the princess. She wanted little Asian boys or little Latino boys to see themselves as the prince.
There is simply no denying the impact of this version. In addition to the 60 million viewers that tuned in to watch the broadcast live, it went on to sell 1 million video cassettes in its first week of home video sales. One of the interesting tidbits I found while reading up on the making of this Cinderella was the fact that producer Deborah Martin Chase said that casting the wicked stepmother was particularly challenging. I cannot emphasize enough what a bitch it was to cast this role. No white actress wanted to be seen as being mean to the black Cinderella. Bette Midler was their first choice, but when she and a few others declined, Bernadette Peters took up the mantle. This was not a topic that I gave much thought to when I was a child watching this on home video. I was not aware of the idea that actresses might have some reservations about playing that role for that reason. And I think that part of the reason my childhood brain was shielded from this was because of the fact that Brandy was not the only black actress, nor was she the only black lead. You had Whitney Houston as the fairy godmother, Whoopi Goldberg as Queen Constantina, and Natalie Desselle as Minerva, one of Cinderella's evil stepsisters. Now, my adult brain can analyze the importance of there being this many performers playing a variety of roles in this production, because if you had had only one of those actresses playing the role that they were cast in, there would immediately be this larger pressure placed upon them to represent the entirety of their community, and people would become far more inclined to scrutinize whichever of those roles they are playing and how that might potentially fall into negative stereotypes or tropes. Is this all this community can play? Does this represent your entire people? Remember this talking point because we will circle back to it. Now we move on to Rush Hour, released in 1998. This was a film that was so successful that it became a trilogy, and even after all these years, there are still conversations around the idea of doing a Rush Hour 4. And even though I am not typically a fan of copaganda, the appeal of Rush Hour, much like the appeal of Bad Boys, is about the chemistry of its two leads. And if Bad Boys could make a comeback after so many years between installments, I see no reason why Rush Hour shouldn't get the chance to do one more round. Moreover, there's this really horrible scene in Bad Boys 2 where Mike and Marcus threaten a teenage boy.
You ever made love to a man? No. You want to?
No, sir.
I hate that scene, and it's played for comedy, and it makes me want to throw away the entire movie except for Gabrielle Union's scenes, of course, because it's Gabrielle Union. We're getting off topic now, I know. But my point is, they've made 2 new Bad Boys films after that long hiatus, and some of the more questionable things from those first 2 films are not present in the 2 new films. So it's fair to guess that if you were to do a Rush Hour 4, they would probably tone down some of the jokes that are now regarded as distasteful products of their time. I'm merely bringing this up to try to get ahead of some of the talking points that people make to try to take away credit from the many things that I personally enjoy from the Rush Hour films, including but not limited to the chemistry and banter between Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan.
You know, I ain't been on no vacation in 5 years. We can hang in my crib. I will show you my hood.
The incredible artistry of Jackie Chan's work as a martial artist and action performer.
Don't move!
And I will always say yes to a Mariah Carey Easter egg. Don't like copaganda, but the appeal of Rush Hour largely comes from this odd couple dynamic. Rush Hour was born from this long-standing buddy cop concept Hollywood has been obsessed with for decades, as well as the odd couple dynamic often seen in comedic duos. Moreover, there had been and would continue to be a number of interracial team-ups in Hollywood movies, especially comedies, though oftentimes those team-ups would involve one black performer and one white performer. However, there was and still is a misconception that people of color are somehow not able to be the leads on their own and generate profits at the box office. This is merely a discriminatory misconception used to justify being exclusionary, but there are still higher ups in show business who believe it.
You know,
Morons.
So it was very much a big deal to end up with this big studio movie that grew into a trilogy, a franchise where the two lead actors were both not white. Jackie Chan had started to find success in Hollywood following the financial success of the American distribution of his film Rumble in the Bronx, after which more of his Chinese movies that already existed were purchased by distributors like New Line and Miramax to be officially distributed in the US. Rush Hour director Brett Ratner was already a fan of Jackie Chan's filmography, which is why he flew all the way out to South Africa, where Jackie was filming another movie, and he had lunch with Jackie. He pitched Rush Hour to him, and after flying back from South Africa, he found out a few days on that Jackie had agreed to do the film. Even in early meetings, he was convinced that some of the pre-existing misunderstandings between actors Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker would work really well for their on-screen relationship, particularly the dynamic that Lee and Carter have at the beginning of that first film, though they do end up coming to more of an understanding by the time the credits roll. They find common ground through not only their work, but are able to have a charming cross-cultural exchange by way of food, language, and Carter going on vacation for the first time in 5 years after they solved the case. Though some naysayers will talk a lot about how poorly a lot of the jokes have aged, not to mention the inevitable period-typical sexism of that 1990s variety, when you put Rush Hour into the larger historical and socio-political context of how the US media spun a narrative that pitted Black and Asian LA residents against one another, there's something extra satisfying about seeing this film begin a journey of these two characters at a place of hostility and misunderstanding, only for them to forge this deeply loving friendship made all the more authentic by the real-life friendship that formed between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker.
And then he was like, wow, you over here. I said, I came to see you. What do you think I'm over here for? You're the only person I know in China.
Moreover, I would argue that Rush Hour is a bit more self-aware than perhaps some people give it credit for.
Johnson, this the LAPD. We the most hated cops in all the free world. My own mama shame on me. She tell everybody I'm a drug dealer.
Particularly when you think about the fact that this first film sets up this boogeyman, this villain, Juntao, in such a way that you think it's going to be a racist stereotype of a villain. It's just textbook American xenophobia. But then plot twist, the bad guy is actually a British colonizer. And that's very fitting given the long history of British colonial occupation of Hong Kong. And this villain feels entitled to ownership of Chinese historical artifacts that he stole. And when you know that, well, you can't help but think about all those hilarious memes about British as well as other European museums that are hoarding stolen artifacts from a number of other countries.
You know, before the changeover, most of this exhibition was in the hands of a single private collector. Me.
Our friendship is built on our mutual distrust of England.
Now, I'm not trying to argue that Rush Hour is going to get added to my Revolution movie playlist, but I will say that it's a really fun film about cross-cultural friendship, Blasian solidarity, and absolutely stellar action artistry. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you will know that my favorite Shakespeare play is Romeo and Juliet. Despite its popularity and the abundance of retellings and adaptations on both stage and screen, I think it's actually quite underrated and misunderstood, with a lot more depth than it gets credit for. And that brings us to the year 2000 and the third film in this Blasian Solidarity trio, Romeo Must Die. I unironically love this movie. I have so much fun with it. And Jet Li and Aaliyah are so ridiculously cute together. And before anyone tries it, yes, I say Aaliyah because I looked it up.
Say your name, Aaliyah?
Aaliyah.
Oh, jeez.
Like Muhammad Ali.
So I've been saying it wrong for a week because they told me.
I'm here to tell you.
Thank you.
Muhammad Ali.
Thank you.
Aaliyah.
Aaliyah.
Romeo Must Die is a retelling of sorts of Romeo and Juliet focusing on two gangs in Oakland. One has Chinese members and another has Black members. Jet Li's character Han, his brother is killed, so he breaks out of prison and comes to Oakland to try to find out what happened to him. Han and Trish, that's Aaliyah's character, they are the son and daughter of the leaders of these two gangs. I actually have my own little Well, I don't know if I would call it an exclusive, but I interviewed actor Peter Shinkoda a couple years back, and he worked on Romeo Must Die back in the day. So obviously, my nostalgia brain simply would not allow me to walk away from that interview without bringing that little tidbit up.
I was there through it all, yeah. I was there because I was working at Warner Brothers as an editor in post-production in the last few years of the millennium. And I remember when I came across that script, I had access to all the shows that Warner was doing. I read it, and I heard that they were going to greenlight it, and somewhere it came to me that they were choosing Vancouver as a location, being Canadian. I was like, and an aspiring actor, I was like, oh. Then I found out it was going to be Chinese versus Italians, then Italians versus black, and then Chinese versus Japanese. It changed so much. Oh. This is how fickle it is behind the scenes.
Yeah.
In a week, it was, who are we going to get? And the funny thing was, like, I had known Russell Wong, and we were talking and hanging out on the set, and I was there with the big fire scene where, you know, they're fighting in fire, and Jet Li's all burnt up, and his hands are all melted. And then Aaliyah's mom was always on set, she was so sweet, and Aaliyah was sweet. And I can't believe, it was only a year later she died. Yeah, so I got to meet her a bunch of times. She was so nice. Can't believe how nice she was, just a class act. Russell was nice, Jet Li was great. And the thing is, I had just worked with him on Lethal Weapon 4. Nobody knew who he was.
Jet Li?
Nobody knew no American knew, unless you're Asian, knew who Jet Li was in 1996. Nobody. Like, I went around and said, whoa, are we looking at Jet Li to be the star of Lethal Weapon 4 against Martin Riggs? And this is going to be awesome. Who's Jet Li, Pete? And then Lethal 4 came out. He's made a household American star, and that's when Romeo Must Die, Exit Wounds, and, you know, Cradle to the Grave came out. And then he kind of went back to China. But that's what made Jet Li, was those, you know, 2-3 movies that he did for Silver Pictures at the time. That made him a household name here. And I was there, the infamous non-kiss at the end.
Yeah.
That was one of the last days of shooting it.
Yeah, I left a very angry comment on Letterboxd where I was like, they should have kissed.
It was the most bizarre thing, and I felt awkward while they're shooting because I knew exactly what was going to be the commentary on it. Whatever they chose, it's a lose-lose situation. You see Aaliyah kiss him at the end, people are going to go apeshit and troll that stuff. Mind you, there was no trolling because there was no internet then, but you know, people would have said things. And
were they not thinking about Whitney Houston's Cinderella?
Yeah, exactly right.
Back to the story, though, and full spoiler alerts for a movie that's almost 25 years old. They never actually kiss in this movie, and that is by far the most talked to death aspect of the film, so I don't actually want to linger on it for all that long, if that's possible. I will say, though, that I found it interesting that Jet Li, who was already a massive star back in Asia, was highly cognizant and spoke openly about the lack of material available to Asian leads in Hollywood. It's not so much that I didn't think he knew that, but it was nonetheless interesting to me to be able to find him actually saying this out loud on the record decades ago.
I think Joe, he knows I played the Lethal Weapon, the bad guy. Now he know I'm gonna be played the good guy. So he find a story, you know, not a lot of story of what scripts talk about Asia people in the States. So they try find out what kind of script fix me. Then they find this one. Then they find 6-7 writers to change. We work on the 8 months about a script. So then we start shooting until now.
Racism was absolutely a motivating factor for why their kiss was not in the final cut. They did film a version of it, but whenever I go back and rewatch the film, the main thing, besides the kiss being cut, that I would have changed is that I think they overdid the editing for the action. I prefer Rush Hour's methodology of doing these longer, uninterrupted sequences of footage in which you can really see what your highly trained leading man is capable of when it comes to action. But to give credit where it's due, imagine my delight when I found out that it was Jet Li's idea to do the most iconic fight scene in the film.
But you know the one I'm talking about?
The fight scene with Jet. Love that scene. Was very excited to shoot that one. was one of the last scenes we shot, and I looked forward to it the whole time. It was Jet's idea to do the fight/dance, and I was just happy she got to be involved with the action. She doesn't just tag along, you know, she's there, she's in it. And we rehearsed for a long time on that one, a month, and we shot it in 3 days. A short scene took 3 days to shoot. So I got to get in the harness, do the wire work. It was fun.
Not him winking at her before he uplifts and empowers her into unleashing some fabulous punches and kicks. Truly, this fight scene, this sexy pas de deux, is cinema. This is culture. This is history. And you know what else made history? The dancing in the club scene. Truly, the amount of times that scene gets replayed in my brain, it's so high. I think about it so much that it makes me feel like I owe them residual checks. Aaliyah is singing along to her own song to flirt with Han. The vibes are vibing, and yet you geniuses higher up in the industry didn't put the kiss in the final version. Racism will really have you sabotaging your own movie. And yet the vibes vibed so hard that we went ahead and had Jet Li appear in the Try Again music video. Remember when movies used to do accompanying music videos for songs in the soundtrack with the actors from that movie appearing in those music videos? We used to be a proper culture. Dust yourself off and try again. If Romeo Must Die was only the pas de deux fight scene and the dancing in the club scene, I would have rated it 5 stars on Letterboxd with 0 hesitation. To give Romeo Must Die credit where it's due though, it was actually really good at being balanced with having heroes and villains on both sides. The original play is an indictment of needless violence between 2 opposing sides, but Romeo Must Die expands to offer a scathing call out of greed. The villains on both sides are enacting violence for the sake of a real estate scheme, and when you give me villains that are obsessed with land acquisition, it's giving colonizer, it's giving landlord, making their inevitable defeat all the more satisfying. I love this narrative choice where when you dig into the main scheme by the real villains of the story, the violence wasn't racially motivated whatsoever. It was just greedy men trying to take things that did not belong to them for the sake of making money. And when they went so far as to harm people that are supposedly on their own side of this rivalry, Han and Trish are the ones that get to step up and serve a bit of karma. Our 2 leads also get to avenge the loss of their brothers without having to cross to the other side in the process because the killer was on the same side as themselves. What did we learn on the show tonight, Greg? What can Bridgerton ultimately learn from Whitney Houston's Cinderella and perhaps the rest of this Blasian Solidarity trio? Well, when it comes to Cinderella, we see how, comparatively speaking, the Netflix adaptation of the Bridgerton universe was not nearly imaginative enough in its approach to diversity. This weird need to make the diversity make sense by way of overly explaining things, they only put themselves deeper into a box. If you had made the commitment from the very beginning to wanting to be ethnically and culturally diverse, you could have and should have made both the Bridgerton and Featherington families multiracial and not in a way that makes sense.
I just want to say for the record that to all the people who are wondering how an African-American mother and a Caucasian father can have an Asian son, the math, the genetic math is love plus love equals love.
That's right.
As a result, you never would have had to explain how racism magically got fixed in that world. Following in the footsteps of Whitney Houston, the blueprint of her world building, you would have been able to elevate the material in a much more forward-thinking way. Mind you, this 1997 Cinderella movie went out of its way to try to elevate a very old-fashioned story. Cinderella is repeatedly told and reminded that she already has power and agency to live life as she pleases. Generally speaking, she's not usually being held hostage in her home. If she would like to run away, she has the freedom to do that. She can choose her own life. You want to go to the party, you can go to the party.
Even something as impossible as going to the ball.
Then go to the ball, Cinderella, go. No one's stopping you but you.
Prince Christopher wants to be able to make his own choices about whomever he's going to marry instead of just going along with some sort of arrangement of matchmaking set up by his parents, but really mostly his mother.
All I'm asking is that you let me choose a bride for myself, in my own way.
Cinderella also ends with her being married to Prince Christopher and her horrible family being locked out. She will not be continuing that relationship with them.
Whatever you want to be.
If only they had followed that example for Penelope Featherington. It doesn't matter that Cinderella has a brief, cute moment with her stepsisters during a musical number. The best decision for her well-being is to cut them off.
When you waltz with him, you whirl around so that your feet never touch the floor.
And in circling back to the Lady Danbury discourse, of people feeling this push and pull about whether or not it's stereotypical for her to be helping others. If you had committed to diversity on a larger scale, if you had cast the show with as much diversity across the two families that had the most airtime for seasons 1 through 3, that being the Bridgerton and Featherington families, and made them multiracial, you would have had more room for more black characters in the mix. And then Lady Danbury, being more or less the Bridgerton fairy godmother, might not have been as harshly scrutinized in the way that Whitney Houston's role as the fairy godmother, I don't see her getting that level of scrutiny, because when you have fewer black performers in your lead roster, that puts more pressure on the few that are present to represent the entirety of their community. Final point, a small one, still in this Cinderella section. I would really like for them to put Lady Danbury in an exquisite, iridescent gold outfit, even if it's only done one time. Hell, you could even skip doing it on the show, but let her wear one at a future premiere, as a wink and a nod to Whitney Houston's fairy godmother. And this is a thought that I have purely from a place of being maybe slightly overly fixated on how iconic this version of Cinderella is. Do I think it's actually necessary in the grand scheme of things? No. But would I like it? Yes. Also, if you had bothered to make these families multiracial, you could have had some main love stories that were interracial without a white person being involved, because believe it or not, it is in fact possible to do that, though this show will never achieve that, I'm presuming, at this point.
You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling.
Now, I don't bring any of this up to suggest that you should go and recast a bunch of the actors that are already currently working on the show. I don't think that would be fair. You've already been cast, and job security in show business is more or less non-existent. I merely bring this talking point up to try to remind any of you watching this who might have your own aspirations to create your own stories, whether as a screenplay, a book, graphic novel. Maybe dream a bit bigger than the so-called progress in Hollywood that in actuality is moving at a glacial pace. Netflix's Bridgerton gets praised for its diversity, but Whitney Houston's Cinderella was running laps around Netflix's Bridgerton's idea of diversity all the way back in 1997. As for Rush Hour, I think Bridgerton really needs to learn from Rush Hour the importance of focusing on relationships and showcasing chemistry. Season 3 really went off the rails by getting even more hyper-fixated on melodrama that just made the viewing experience deeply unpleasant. I have zero intention of ever doing a recreational rewatch of Bridgerton Season 3. Any rewatches of that season will be purely for research purposes for any potential videos that would require me to go and revisit certain parts depending on the video topic. It simply was not fun for me to watch. There were some fun moments, but as a complete season, no. What makes Rush Hour fun to revisit is this banter, the relationship between Lee and Carter that mirrored the development of Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan's friendship in real life.
See? How difficult is that? My English? You even cannot see 3 words. Chinese.
Need some lunch.
You need some lunch?
I got it before, Jackie.
You can watch interviews from the Season 3 press tour and see how much fans love the chemistry and banter, the genuine friendships that seem to be present in the Bridgerton cast. All you need to do is put that chemistry and camaraderie into the scripts. Put it on the show, put it on our screens.
I don't know if I'd want to do a horror film because I'd be too scared.
Although I think that would take the scare away from it. I think you'd be like, oh, this isn't scary at all.
I sound like an idiot. I'd be too scared.
It's not real.
I don't want to do a horror film because I'd be too scared.
Like you'd read the script and then be like,
Netflix's Bridgerton is called Bridgerton, and yet they threw away so much of the Bridgerton family banter in Season 3. I don't watch Bridgerton for melodramatic plots. I watch it for banter and vibes and romance. Season 2 had all of those things in abundance. And speaking of vibes, Romeo Must Die. My 2 favorite scenes, like I said, are the pas de deux fight scene and the dancing in the club scene. What are those scenes offering? Vibes, connection. If the vibes are immaculate, I may very well overlook a lot of other flaws, especially when romance is the main thing you are meant to be offering me on this show. I often drag Bridgerton for its non-existent class consciousness, but I don't nitpick things like Pride and Prejudice or the 2007 Northanger Abbey for having non-existent class consciousness, because the best adaptations of those stories are feeding me quality romantic vibes in abundance. If you, Bridgerton, are supposed to be a romance show where the whole genre is romance, and then you fail to deliver enough romance, yeah, I'm going to also start dragging your characters for their lack of class consciousness, especially when you have the audacity to ask me to care about plots that are ultimately exposing their high-class privilege through an uncritical lens. It's like you, the people in charge of deciding how the story goes on this show, have been given darts to play around, and then you're throwing the darts and you're not even hitting the board. You just hit the bartender. He's now got to go get medical treatment. Nice work. Oh, and let me remind all of you that Romeo Must Die, a romance film with music deep in its DNA, because you've got Aaliyah as the lead, Timbaland's doing music on the film. You know who else is in the cast? DMX.
Grabbing up every piece of waterfront he can get his hands on. Now he wants to be a club owner.
I got a gun. Help. That's the DMX. Who's doing?
Can we please get some more relevant cameos or casting choices for Bridgerton? You already had a Mr. Hearst cameo. I know you did that just for me, and I will thank you for it.
Is that cake?
It is indeed.
Lemon?
Pardon?
I fancy a good lemon. Aye, very true. Damn tedious waste of an evening.
Yet another reason why season 2 is the season that's near and dear to me. But can we please get JJ Fields to have a cameo too? What's the hold up?
Miss Morland's gown. Miss Morland's gown is very pretty. Though I don't think it'll wash well. I'm afraid it will fray.